There's a lot of discussion these days of narrative change.
Networking is essential to collaboration, and collaboration is essential to narrative change.
Empower artists, first of all, by just putting them at the table, not as entertainment or as an afterthought, but as essential strategic partners at the start of the messaging or narrative change campaign. They're skilled communicators and community problem solvers who know how to use their art as a powerful tool for social change. We want and need them to be part of the narrative change posse.
Especially when you talk to the younger demographic who really revere celebrity, they respect what's being said among these celebrities, and they want to learn more, they want to know more, they want to become a part of the process. Changing the narrative by storytelling, talking about their lived experience, talking about their friends, their family.
Narrative change needs a posse. You're one person, one organization, even when it's the President of the United States, can say exactly the right thing, but if people are not hearing it over and over and over again from different sources they trust and in different forms, it's not going to stick.
Recognize the arenas where people are changing hearts and minds already. You know, there are cultural activists, cultural strategists, people who work in food, all of these other things that are deeply tapped into what we need to change people's minds and change stories.
Our foundation partners and our corporate partners help fund our work. Our government partners and our academic partners help inform our work, and our nonprofit partners help carry it out. And so what we had to do was find a way for everybody to fit at the table, but it was intentional, and that really helped us.
We have to be disciplined to figure out in our busy movement lives to make space and time to be proactive and intentional and be looking at the longer picture.
Hey, welcome back. The theme of our 1-hour panel discussion is narrative change needs a posse. Where have we heard that? The discussion will focus on essential players and elements of a social justice narrative change campaign. Please welcome back Andy Carey and Norma Chavez-Peterson. Joining me, and please join me in welcoming the far end, Kristen Plumberg-Bennett. Please give us Felicia Shaw and Charlie Sherman via Zoom. Each of their bios are in your program preview, so we're going to jump right into it. And the first question, Charlie. So, if narrative change needs a posse, who should be deputized and why?
Thank you, Cheryl, for having us all this convening. I kind of feel like the sick kid in class who's forced to TV project into the classroom a little bit being in this crowd, but I'm still so excited to talk to you guys. Cheryl, to quickly answer your question, I think, when you first asked the question, the kind of reaction I had is who doesn't really need to be brought into the fold in this narrative change work and be empowered as an agent of narrative change. I think one of the key points that I took away from what Alan was talking about earlier, and really what we believe that the opportunity agenda is that narrative is an ecosystem, right? And so there is no one message, no one messenger, no one public opinion poll that will tell us everything we need to know about audiences that we need to persuade, right? Rather, narrative change tasks us to understand the role that each of us play in shaping narrative. And so if I'm thinking about the people that really need to be brought into a narrative change posse that aren't necessarily already there, I think we think traditionally when we think of who changes narrative, we think of politicians, we think communicators, people who work in strategic comms. And I think my answer would be we have to start thinking a lot more expansively of who's really shaping a narrative in public opinion, right? And so thinking about people who work in culture, people who work in the arts, youth, etc. people who can help us tap into a much wider coalition to really spread these narratives and have them gain root. And so, you know, that's a bit of a non-answer to your question, but I think the main takeaway that I'm taking is that we need everyone in this fight for narrative change, and really understanding the best practices in narrative change are understanding what specific people need to play what specific role given the goals that we have in that moment for our larger narrative change efforts.
I appreciate that. Do I need the mic back? Am I good? I appreciate that answer, and in fact, that's a great segue to Felicia. And so Felicia, it actually lets you know that we've been thinking about how we're going to answer these questions prior to this event. So she knows it's coming, so there's no blind side. So what are 2 or 3 essential elements for fostering collaboration between artist activists and social justice movements? Do I need that? You can have this.
So I'm so glad, Charlie, you queued me up to talk about artists, particularly because...
Oh, sorry. You need this mic. I don't know.
Why?
I have everything.
Okay.
I just followed
Okay. Does this one work better? See, actually, that one worked better.
It's good now.
Okay. Anyway, I was saying I was glad Charlie queued me up to talk about artists being a part of the Posse. As executive director of San Diego Art Matters, which is an arts advocacy and service organization serving San Diego County, they are the soldiers. Actually, they are an important tool for social change that we utilize artists all the time to share 2 important messages. One, about the value of the arts, period, that, you know, we always have to go out and make that case so that the arts are considered seriously. And then the other 50% of the time, we're out helping others tell their story. So the 2 to 3 essential elements for fostering collaboration between artists and activists in social justice movements. First, empower artists, first of all, by just putting them at the table, not as entertainment or as an afterthought, but as essential strategic partners at the start of the messaging or narrative change campaign. Many are purpose-driven to serve as activist artists, or we call them artivists. They're skilled communicators and community problem solvers who know how to use their art as a powerful tool for social change. We want and need them to be part of the narrative change posse. 2, when inviting artists to the table, be prepared for art-based solutions that are thought-provoking and challenging. Socially engaged art is not meant to affirm our existing beliefs, but to agitate and disrupt social norms. So be careful what you ask for. Let artists be the secret sauce that can ignite your campaign.
I want to interrupt right there because you're making a really good point. Art serves to disrupt.
To disrupt, yeah.
So talk a little bit more about that. How do you connect the disruptors?
Connect the disruptors
to those of us who want to see things disrupted.
Well, artists are in our community. I mean, it's not like you, well, maybe you say, okay, I work in this field, I work in health, or I work in the prison system, and I don't know any artists. Well, we have a whole community who are all around us, and if you walk around, say downtown San Diego, and you see some of the murals on the wall, they look beautiful. They're beautifying, but look deeply at the messages that they're trying to portray. So, you'll see down in the little corner, you'll see the signature. Who is that? Just go on Google them and say, hey, I have this problem that I'm working on, and I'm wondering if you could help amplify that message. Can you help me get this out to people in a way that they can hear it? And one other thing about getting them to the table is artists. A lot of artists like to work in studio, and you see those stereotypes of the artist working alone. But actually, artivists, the activist artists, are most comfortable working in community. They want you to put your hands on the brush. They want you to be singing together. Those protest songs and making posters, that's where the real action happens. And so the artists that you'll be looking for are those who are entirely comfortable with the process. It's not about having this beautiful thing at the end, but it's about everything that went into making this thing together, because that's where the memory comes from. That's where, you know, the power comes from. And so those are my, you know, examples.
Can you give a couple of successful partnerships that we might have recognized?
Yeah, I have one that's going on right now here in San Diego. So we collaborated with the City of San Diego Commission for Arts and Culture on this project called Far South Border North. It's kind of like a WPA project for today. And we put 100 artists to work educating the public about issues like around public health and civic engagement, climate change, and social justice. And this one dance artist who was chosen, his name is Marcos Duran. He used part of his grant funding to receive human rights advocacy training from Alliance San Diego. I don't know if they're here today.
Mm-hmm. I think they may be online.
And this is a community organization that works to increase civic engagement around voting. And so with his training, he developed his Dancing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That's the name of it, Dancing the Declaration of Human Rights Project. He educated all these high school students living in National City and Chula Vista on the 30 articles in the document through educational dance instruction. So instead of him trying to teach these young activists about human rights, he let them dance it out. And so now, you know, they're going to take it into the streets and be dancing, and people will be curious about it and ask questions about it. And hopefully that will send the message more readily than a pamphlet. Let's read about, you know, human dignity and justice. But someone will probably tell someone over dinner, hey, you know, I saw these kids out there dancing about human rights and dignity. And maybe they picked up one or two things, but again, we're letting the artist do the job of telling the story and changing the narrative instead of a brochure.
Yeah, I think it also brings them in as more concrete partners.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're participating from early on.
Yeah.
So let me go down to the end here. Kristen, you work with people who are established, recognized artists and cultural influencers. So what 2 or 3 motivating factors would you present for engaging social and cultural influencers?
Well, I think, so first of all, let me just say my name is Kristen Plumberg-Bennett. I am the development director at Go Campaign, an organization that gives opportunity to vulnerable youth throughout the world. We are fortunate in that we have a few celebrity ambassadors that work with us to help elevate awareness and raise funds and awareness about the issues that we work on. But I've also worked in the past for Barbara Streisand's foundation, J.J. Abrams Foundation, and did the relations for the UN Foundation, Entertainment Relations. So I've worked with a lot of different influencers throughout the years. Some of the motivating factors for social and cultural influencers, number one is they have this platform. So they have this amazing platform where they have the capability to reach a vast, engaged audience very quickly. They also have visibility, so they allow and lend credibility to an issue or something that might have been stigmatized in the past, and make it much more human and give it a human face. And so that's something where, you know, that platform is very important. And then the dissemination, obviously they can generate buzz that it's very hard to generate with, let's say, a legislative process or with a politician. It can be a lot harder for them to reach the masses in the way that, especially when you talk to the younger demographic who really revere celebrity, they respect what's being said among these celebrities, and they want to learn more, they want to know more, they want to become a part of the process. And then authenticity, I think this goes very much to what Alan was saying during his presentation. You can run into trouble quickly if you do not make sure that you engage an influencer who is authentic to your cause or your platform. So, you know, also to Alan's earlier research talking about crisis intervention, a lot of the time just in the past of what celebrity philanthropy used to be a lot of responsive, like, oh shoot, my image took a plummet and so I need to immediately do some repair, and so I'm gonna do some work in the Congo, or I'm gonna do something here that's gonna basically divert attention. that's very dangerous, and that thankfully is something that we've moved away from in the last several years. It's something where now when you engage a celebrity, you need to understand and do your own personal vetting. You need to understand where they stand on issues, what they've said in the past, what they're affiliated with, who they are, also their lived experience. Are they an immigrant? Are they someone who has lived this experience? Do they actually understand inherently the issues at hand? And then, you know, it's a risky situation, but you basically have to weigh the pros and cons and really make sure that you put down parameters for these people who you engage with. Say, here's how we want to work together. Yes, you're doing us a favor, but we're also doing you a favor by lending credibility to your brand. And so I think it's very important to make sure that it's a two-way street when you're working together with these influencers.
Appreciate that.
Sure.
But we don't all walk around knowing Barbara Streisand.
You don't?
No, I don't. Maybe someone else hears. But what I guess what I'm hoping to learn, and I know others are interested in, is what's the process for making that connection?
Sure. So it's not an easy connection, I will say. I think it takes a lot of preparation, a lot of planning. So you need to do your research. You need to determine whatever platform or cause you're working around, is there an authentic tie to it? I think that's where you can start. You can figure out if they feel a certain way about a certain issue. That's someone that you can maybe start with a short list and say, these are the people who care about the issues which I'm looking for. And then it's really about kind of going the talent route. And so most of these influencers are going to have an agent, a manager, and a publicist. And your agents are really just worried about the money, so you're going to want to avoid agents.
Avoid agents.
Because if they don't get their percentage, But the publicists are really the ones that you're going to want to engage with, and sometimes the managers too, because the managers tend to do a little bit more holistically looking at that career. So if you have any sort of knowledge of who, you can go on IMDb, for example, .com. You can look and see who represents the talent. You can also find on IMDb who their publicist is. You can do outreach that way. You can also sometimes reach out via fan groups, and fan groups will sometimes have a way to circumvent the regular channels. There's a lot of different ways in which you can do it, but I would say publicists are really your best bet. And when you go to them, what you need to do is have a clear call to action and a clear ask and a clear, I guess you would say, like, next step. So, you know, if we're talking about immigration, the last thing you want is someone coming to you and saying, okay, well, we need to change the narrative around immigration. Do you think Salma Hayek can help me do that? Mm-hmm. I don't know. In what way? What are your end goals? How are you hoping to accomplish this? What are you asking her to speak on? Does she care about that? Is that something, like, she was once undocumented. She was an illegal immigrant for a while. Like, does she have that lived experience? Okay, let's talk to that. Let's equip her with the facts. But that also might be something that doesn't interest her at all. And that is not. She's actually more of a female empowerment activist. So you have to know what they want, what they're interested in, and then go approach with how you want them to engage, what you want them to do, and what you'll do for them in return. You know, what are you offering in return? Is that something where you're going to be able to offer thought leadership for them? Is that going to help their brand? Are they going to be able to talk about immigration on a platform that they haven't before, where they're armed and equipped with knowledge that they haven't had before? Are you going to give them public appearance opportunities? Are they going to go to galas? Are they going to do media appearances? Are they going to talk about this? I really can't say enough how it needs to be a two-way street. Yeah, a lot of the times I feel like us working in social impact, we feel lucky that we have a celebrity or an influencer, and we're like, oh great, like this is amazing. And we don't ask them enough. But you have to remember, like, they're helping us, you're helping them in return.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Andy, what are a few essential elements of fostering collaboration between funders activists, and social justice movements?
It's a great question, Cheryl, and thank you for the opportunity to join you. You know, in the Border Philanthropy Partnership, when we first started, we were limited to just community foundations. And I share this story because anecdotally it gets the answer to this question. And I came from the membership world, where you invite a very diverse group of stakeholders to the table to respond to an issue. And it would have been in September, October of 2008, I did my first border tour on behalf of Border Philanthropy Partnership, and I went out from San Diego, Tijuana, all the way to Brownsville and Matamoros. And I was in all these meetings where our foundation partners were there, and the academic partners were there, and the nonprofits they were helping. Everybody was around the table, and I came back and I told the board, I said, we need to open up who gets to participate, because everybody was also very frustrated, because we were started by the Ford Foundation and the Mott Foundation. They were doling out lots of grants, big grants, to the 18 community foundations, and a lot of groups wanted in on it. And they were said, no, 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 only these 18 groups. So when now the new guy comes around and passing around, hey, you should get involved with us. And what we had to press on to the foundation members, because when we went to them and said, hey, all these nonprofits, all these activist groups, they want to get involved, and they said, oh my God, Andy, if you let all these groups in, all they're going to do is ask us for money. And I said, well, you're in the business of giving away money, so you really shouldn't have a problem with it. 15 years later, it has worked, because our group grew from 18 community foundations to now 408 groups that represent academia, business and corporate partners, government agencies, nonprofit organizations, and grant-making foundations. And the reason it works is because our foundation partners and our corporate partners help fund our work. Our government partners and our academic partners help inform our work, and our nonprofit partners help carry it out. And so what we had to do was find a way for everybody to fit at the table, but it was intentional, and that really helped us. Because if it's just a group X and they want to make this particular project happen, well, they're not going to make it happen unless they have some other expertise, some other talent, and some other know-how around the table. And that speaks very importantly to our work. And also, cultural competence is going to be really important. I talk about it all the time. If Novi were still here, he was my student at USD in the graduate program. I really pushed hard on cultural competence, because when you work in the binational region, you need to know when somebody tells you yes, what that yes really means. Because when somebody tells you yes, what they're really saying is they've heard you. They may not agree with you, but they've heard you. They're acknowledging that you said something and they heard what you said. But that doesn't mean they agree to it. They're going to do what they said they're going to do. And you have to be able to know, is that really a commitment or not? And it's a skill I've had to hone over 30 years. And obviously, you know, I speak Spanish. I've immersed myself in the culture. I'm not Latino, but all my best friends are. And so you really develop an appreciation, and it's something that over time you can get really good at, and it's really important. And so also helping make sure that everybody has the right seat at the table, but they're also being heard, that we meet them where they're at, that we exercise cultural humility in everything we do. Empathy is really important. All these things really matter, because at the end of the day, when we need to impact something important to happen for our community, to address vulnerabilities, we need to make sure that we're actually going to address them. And that has really worked for us at the Border Philanthropy Partnership.
Thank you. And I thought I was one of your best friends, but okay. Okay. So, I appreciate the example, and I'm sure everyone did, the example that you gave about how you grew the organization focusing on connecting funders to intent. What happens when funders aren't doing what you want them to do? And you're wanting to, if we're trying to do a narrative change campaign and we need funders to get in line and do a certain thing, how do we use this moment to begin to enlist them and educate them on what that means?
You know, one of the biggest challenges we have, in my view, leading a nonprofit, and because we're Border Philanthropy Partnership, everybody thinks we have a lot of money, and we don't. Every year we start at zero. We just started an endowment campaign a year ago. So, you know, when you hear, oh, we're going to do this, Yeah, I get angry a lot with funders, or when they come out with, oh, we're going to make you do this 50-page report, or we're going to make you do that. And I was like, oh, for God's sake, shake yourselves, because it doesn't it doesn't help us get to where we need to go. And I try to exercise my leadership to help be a voice of reason. And I do notice that there's a change in the sector about it. To deal with, since 2018, we've been dealing with a lot of challenges in the border region. When Mr. Trump gave the order to seal the border, and the people on the right think that he actually did it and that the world got better. Well, he created an incredible humanitarian crisis. So we mobilized to get people. One, we had to explain to people what was happening. So we put together a white paper to circulate to the Ford Foundation, the Mott Foundation, the Gonzalo Rio Arante, Annie Casey, and others, and it helped generate over $2 million in charitable giving and grants to the borderlands on both sides of the border. But we get into trouble because a lot of those funds don't make it into Mexico, where the real problem exists. And funders have a huge adversity to, oh, well, we need to just give money to the U.S. side. And every week, every month, I participate in these funder calls about this related. Participate in the one with California, I do the one with New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas, and it is painful because they say, well, we have all this money, but we'll help the migrant cause when they get into the United States. And you start banging your head on the wall because they need to understand that the problem is just 1 mile over the barrier, and we could do a lot more for a lot less. And so we have a huge challenge. The reason I tell these stories is because we have a huge challenge to help educate funders to really understand all the ecosystems that they're trying to fund. It drives me crazy. They have their own little language that nobody understands. And it's rather off-putting because, here in the borderlands, we don't have to use all that highfalutin language to express that a migrant's situation is very challenged. It really comes off as disrespectful, demeaning, and unapproachable, and it's really disgusting. And it doesn't help at the end of the day to show you're the smartest person in the room. You may be the smartest person in the room, but you have no heart, and we need to fix that. I believe the funders want to do well. I think they want to have an incredible impact, but we also have to help them get over themselves sometimes. There are some funders that are really helpful in getting these things over the table.
So wait, what are their characteristics?
The ones that...
The helpful ones.
They're not bureaucratic. They make it easy for you, once you're select, to actually get the funds. We got a grant from the Packard Foundation, and it went underspent by a little bit. They let us keep the money. They said, we don't want it back. Tell us how you're going to spend it, and you keep it. Go forth and prosper. That was a beautiful thing. In Mexico, if that happens to you, you have to give the whole thing back. Not just what you didn't spend, but everything you already spent. So there's some huge cultural difference in the region. Spending time with the program officers really helps, because if they're willing to get to know you, they become your champions. So getting those funders to become your champion is really important. I got a chance to go address the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation at the Flint, Michigan headquarters. And the program officer set me up to go deliver. He actually basically wrote the presentation that he wanted me to give. And I watched the chairman of the board lead the foundation, and I started sweating because during the whole day, like observing all of you today. And I called back to the office. I said, we are toast. I said, the presentation, Nick put me in here to get, I said, I'm going to look like an idiot. And I said, we got to redo this. So I was dictating things over my cell phone, and they locked me up in the Mott Family Foundation library, and we redid the presentation. And I said, and we're not telling anybody. So whammo, on come the slides, and I was nervous because I thought if I take this guy off, he's going to cut us off. But there was so much that had to be said that I learned about being with them about what the Mott family's interests were. And it turns out Charles Stewart Mott's wife, Ruth, was a borderlander.
Wow.
Well, how can I, on behalf of Border Philanthropy Partnership, not go and press the case? And we dazzled them. But it was a huge risk. Oh my God, it was a risk, because I threw out the presentation that my program officer told me to do, and I was like, ew, see if he's still talking to me after this one. But we got funding for 3 more years, so it worked. But the reason is we took some risks, but we appealed to the greater audience, but we also listen a lot. I always listening to what they're talking about, because it really guides everything what you're doing. And I will tell you one other quick story. During COVID, we are the fiscal sponsor to the Ventanilla de Salud program here in San Diego. Under López Obrador, si hay mexicanos aquí con todo, mil disculpas, casi nunca hablo en su contra, but López Obrador in la Cuarta Transformación, oh my God, he basically is Trump for the other side. And he undid the funding for a lot of very critical initiatives that Mexico invests in. And one of them is the Ventanilla de Salud. We used to get paid in January, February for the work you do for the year. Now we pay in December. So basically you got to run the program for the whole year. But they ticked me off, because, by the way, there was no notice that they were going to just stiff you for 11 months and let you figure it out. So we had to go raise the funds. Well, they made me mad. And of all the groups that helped support the Ventanilla de Salud program across the United States, I'm the only one that knows how to raise money. So I was like, I'm going to fix this. So I leveraged some relationships, and we convinced the Packard Foundation to give us $2.5 million to help the Ventanilla Salud program across the United States. My board got really nervous with me because they were pressing me to go for a big number. And I thought, all right, I'll commit to 250,000 people. And the Packard said, nope, you got to up your game. So I'm like, okay, I'll do 500,000. And my board says, Andy, you are crazy. How are you going to guarantee that you are going to do more than 500,000 people? And I said, I have no idea. But if we don't go along with this, they're not going to give us the money. And I was hopeful, because in the United States, it's more aspirational. When you tell a foundation, they're willing to let you go a little bit. And if it were in Mexico, I would never have done it. But so I said, all right, we're going to do 1 million people. But by the way, could I have 18 months? And they said, we'll give you 18 months. We actually needed 2 years to do it, but we did it. And I was like, oh my God. And I was checking the numbers every week, and my board's like, you are nuts. You are going to get us in trouble. And I said, no, it'll be okay. So, but the reason I share that is because there was a need. There was a need for the project to happen, but also to get a big funder. And we also were able to force the hand of the Mexican government, because I made Mexico match the gifts I made for each one of the Ventanillas, because we brought some diplomatic friends in to the table. And the reason I asked Alan the question I did about how do you mitigate the risks when we were talking about Jose Antonio Vargas, the reason we partnered with the Mexican government is because it gives Zona Seguro coverage. It creates a safe zone for the migrants to come in. So that meant the immigration authorities, Donald Trump, all those jokers at the time couldn't interfere with the work we were trying to do. It was because we built the partnerships that Cheryl's asking about with the foundation, with the government, and with the nonprofits, and we created a rather dynamic program across the whole country. It was successful. So it's a very long response to your question, but thank you.
Thank you. Great. And you met jokers in a nonpartisan way, I know. Norma, I really want us to pay close attention to how Norma responds to this question, because it's, I push back when we ever talk about things that happen in theory and things that happen in practice. And one thing that Norma did accomplish in coalition with partners was the creation of the San Diego Rapid Response Network. And Norma, I actually know how that started. It's one of those parking lot conversations that turns into something really great. But can you share some lessons learned in building and launching the Rapid Response Network that can be applied to the creation of a scalable network of social justice organizations?
Not a big question at all, and I don't know how much time we have, so I will try to be succinct. And for folks that don't know, I'll very briefly, we have the 2016 election, an outcome that none of us expected, in a nonpartisan way. And then January happens, Muslim ban, and literally we were already in crisis mode in terms of just being reactive to all the different blows that were coming at us across different issue areas. And so the Rapid Response Network was born at a time when we knew that undocumented immigrants that were in the country had a big target on our backs, right? Because of what was happening. And so we were preparing for mass deportations, like massive deportations. And so it was that kind of moment that then it was myself and a couple other EDs that said, we need to get everybody, I like to say everybody and their mother that cares about immigrants in San Diego County to come together to begin to really think through and plan out what we got to do to protect people. Like that was the idea. And so it was out of a lot of work to try to invite everyone. And you know, I'll just say for movement organizations, you all know, I think on the left, we tend to, you know, we will argue about all sorts of stuff and not be focused on the things that we do align on. And we end up wasting a lot of time around the things that we might not agree on. And meanwhile, the other side is, left us, right? And so it was out of that effort in early 2017 that we invited everyone, including organizations that didn't get along, to begin to envision and think through what is the kind of infrastructure, ecosystem, collaboration that we needed to build to protect folks from mass deportation. And so it was out of that effort, 10 months of lots of work, I won't get into the details, and then the Rapid Response Network was born, which included a hotline, et cetera, and shared fundraising. Once we developed that plan, we said we got to raise $1.5 million, was I think our goal for that first year. And a lot of the money, you know, I was one of the core leaders of that wasn't going to come to the ACLU, but we knew that we needed to build infrastructure and the legal services aspect of our ecosystem and some volunteer base building, organizing, know your rights stuff, and communications, because most immigrant rights organizations, there's very few organizations that even have communication staff. And so we kind of defined what the gaps were, what we needed to do, and then we sought to raise some funds. And so we did all of that, and then, you know, again, the Rapid Response Network was born. I think the lessons learned for me, because it hasn't all been perfect, and we're at a different place, because I'll say that we started with this idea, and then we were dealing with all sorts of blows. All of a sudden, you know, the Trump administration had all sorts of policies, and too many to name, including Remain in Mexico, and I mean, you name it, where families started to get dumped in the streets, right? Barrio Logan, Greyhound Station. And we still see the issues happening today, right, with street releases. And so we had to pivot. So we sought to build this infrastructure. We had some plans, and then we had to kind of be nimble and then that led to the creation of the San Diego Rapid Response Shelter Network, which I think to date, and it's operated by Jewish Family Service, and I think to date it's probably helped over 150,000 migrants, right, on their journey north. But I will say that I think the lessons learned to me, number one is about the need for movement organizations to make space and time to actually be proactive and intentional. We spend so much time putting out fires and in constant reactive mode. And it's easy to do, and sometimes we kind of have to do it, but if we don't figure out how to make space and time, I think about going to the mountaintop and thinking that big picture. You know, even the conversation today and thinking about narrative, you know, Ed and I were talking, and Ed used to be on our comms team, now he's at our partner org at CIPC, is like, even around just the conversation for today. So much of our work is like messaging, this campaign, that campaign, and we're just sometimes do too much and don't make even a little bit of time to, again, step back, out, and look at the big picture and to be thinking about what are those anchoring narratives, right? And so I think for me, that's one big lesson learned. And especially with the political moment that we're dealing with right now, regardless of what happens in November, right? We saw the Obama, you know, narrative, and it wasn't great, right? And the damage that that's created, you know, in terms of the broader, like, fight for immigrant rights. And so I think we have to be disciplined to figure out in our busy movement lives to make space and time to be proactive and intentional and be looking at the longer picture. The other big lesson is we can't do it alone. It takes a posse, takes a crew, takes all of us, takes people that sometimes don't get along. But we have to, it's not about us. It's about thinking about what we could do together, the things that we cannot do alone. And that takes time too. Building relationships, one of our organizational consultants and executive coach, Michael Bell, and I don't know where he got this quote from, but he always says, change happens at the speed of trust. And that's true. And so in relationships, regardless of whether it's engaging with influencers or building and broadening a philanthropic kind of network beyond just community foundations or artists, everything requires relationships. It's about the power in the relationship. And so if you don't make space and time and you're just doing the work and not, again, thinking about how am I building trusting relationships, intentional relationships, nothing's going to work. And so I think that's a big lesson for me. And then the other piece is the building the infrastructure and thinking about how does whatever project we're working on, how are we adding value and how are we investing in the kind of sustainable infrastructure that organizations need. And when we talk about a comms perspective, and my chief of communications knows, especially for ACLU where we work on across different issues, it becomes very difficult, but it's also difficult when we're working in coalitions here and there, and we believe deeply in coalitions. But not every coalition has comms, so how can we be thought partners? How can we be a resource? How can it just not be about us? And how are we making sure that X organization is stronger as a result of this? So it's really forcing us to think more broadly and not just about us, right? Or our organizational lens that sometimes we might look at. And then I think the other piece is the collaboration. I've talked about it already. We can't do it alone, and it requires collaboration, and that requires time and intentionality and a commitment to collaborate. I'll say there's folks that are in the movement that I like to say their empire is like about me. Like I know I have all the answers. I know how to do it. And that kind of mindset doesn't lead to like a collaborative process. And so I think that this work requires a real collaboration, vulnerability. I heard it many times, authenticity. Like we got to keep it real. We got to be honest. We got to be willing to have tough conversations and move forward. So those are, I think, some of my lessons.
As you talked about making space and time, there's also this thing that you did, because I was your comms person, when you came and said, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to support them. This is the time that you're going to have allotted to do that. And these are the deliverables that we want. So what is the power that org leaders have to do to not just engage within their own organizations, but in peer relationships? How do you bring other organization leaders to the table and then hold them accountable for delivering on these shared goals?
Yeah, that's a tough question.
Hey, that's what I'm here for.
I would say that there's a couple things. One, as a leader, and I think you heard from Andy some of the risks he's had to take. Felicia, when you're in a leadership position, you're the executive director. You've got to be a risk taker. Because if not, I'm sorry. Change doesn't happen if you're just comfortable, right? And so, in this particular situation, even when we created, and we were in the initial stages of creating the Rapid Response Network, when we did have to pivot to a much more humanitarian, right? And ACLU is not a direct, services organization, so we know that. I knew that. But I also knew that if we wanted to have intentional relationships with those legal service providers, those human services organizations that were dealing with the food and the legal intake, and if ACLU wasn't going to be willing to throw down, then don't expect us to find a quick plaintiff. Don't expect us to be able to identify those rights abuses that then maybe we could do a white paper on or whatever to then move that systems change. That we really, as an ACLU, and I'm speaking, as a head of the affiliate, you know, and Anna's here, right? My executive assistant, board relations person, like, it really took us thinking about, you know what, we couldn't do it forever. For a couple months, sorry, Anna, I can handle 10 months. Anna, I can handle my calendar. You're out there at Our Lady of Guadalupe Church doing intake and maybe jumping on an ambulance with a migrant that just almost collapsed that needs to be accompanied to the emergency room, because that's what our partners needed, because every organization was throwing down resources that they didn't have allocated for that, but for that period. And we did that until we continued to raise funds and ring the alarms and talk to lawmakers. You know, I still have the receipts of text messages with lawmakers who were like, well, Norma, what can the state government do? This is the federal government's job. Immigration is and I mean, I won't mention names, but part of it is there is stuff that you can do. And eventually we got a $20 million rapid response fund out of the state of California. A couple months later from that rapid response moment. So being able to respond to what the needs are, but again, making space and time for that bigger systems change and connecting the dots is, I think, is my superpower. Yeah, but I also think that organizationally, you know, and I have an amazing board. I have a couple Greg Rose is on my board. Pat is online, and David Gansey just turned off of our board. I've got to say, like, for a leader to be able to lead in these kinds of moments and to be nimble, we also have the board that supports us and trusts our judgment and our leadership, and that kind of has our back, because there are moments that I heard many times, well, ACLU doesn't do that. Wow. I was like, well, we're going to do that right now. And then we pivot back into our role. But I will say that during those years of Trump, there's so many, I mean, there's too long to list. Not just lawsuits that were filed where our national office was the lead, but we helped to identify plaintiffs like this, because we were on the ground, we had a legal investigator, we had the trusting relationships with the organizations that we wouldn't have had otherwise. And so it does require, I think, for a leader to be bold, to take risk, and for the board leadership to have trust. And the change happens at the speed of trust, right, at all levels.
Mm-hmm. Appreciate that. Charlie, how can efforts to advance preferred narratives be unified and sustained so that real change can occur? And I hope you'll take some time to talk about the work that the Opportunity Agenda is doing, as well as your strategy table.
Yes, definitely. And I want to make sure that folks can hear me loud enough before I keep talking, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks for the thumbs up. Well, this is the $1 million question, and when you asked it in my mind immediately, I was like, there's a couple of different ways to answer that, but I think grounding it in some of Opportunity Agenda's work and sticking to 3 main kind of principles will be helpful. So one of the first things that I always tell folks when they're developing narrative strategy, beginning just at the really starting point of like what is narrative, all the way to folks that are really steeped in this work, is to really build power and sustain it. We need to have an affirmative vision that we're working towards as a movement, right? I've heard a lot of people talking about rapid response, a lot of people talking about just the things that come up day in, day out, working in this field, right? The fires we need to put out every day. A lot of what we talk about is how can your organization, your movement, etc., actually have a vision that it's working towards, that people can be excited about, that can motivate audiences. And so I'll give folks the example of the Opportunity Agenda's recent work. So we received funding in the last couple of months to essentially run a project called the Immigrant Narrative Strategy Table. It's building off of really impactful work from all the way back from folks at California Immigrant Policy Center, who did winning the immigration narrative work, through to the Brace Forward's the Butterfly Lab for Immigrant Narrative Strategy. And essentially the goal of the project is working in conjunction with major national immigrant rights organizations like United We Dream, Define American, National Partnerships for New Americas, and many more, is twofold. One, to establish an affirmative vision for the immigrant justice movement 50 years down the line, So what would it look like if we're all put out of a job because things are advocated successfully, things are lobbied successfully, and also the culture has changed, right? So it's not just about policies and politics and political parties, but it's about culture, representation, people's deep mental models, etc., for how they're understanding the issues. And the goal of this project is to articulate a 50-year vision out that's sort of decided upon not by one organization, by a real cross-section of organizations that have different considerations and goals and are working intersectionally but around shared values and shared beliefs. And then to take that 50-year vision on the road, turn it into training materials for spokespeople, for organizers, for advocates, for legal folks, and really, you know, as Alan talked about, the opportunity agenda's bread and butter is training anyone who's willing to become a persuader towards narratives that we want to see in the world, right? And so for me, I think with that project, with the opportunity agendas, other immigration work, a lot of it is what is the affirmative vision we actually want to move people and work people towards, right? And we're a big believer that for sustainable and systems change, fear is not going to be the winning motivating factor, right? We need something positive and affirmative to move people towards. So that's kind of my, you know, really big picture takeaway. Thinking about some of the nuts and bolts, you know, organizations like the Opportunity Agenda, Narrative Initiative are far and few between. I think we need a couple of more spaces that can really help build out the narrative capacity for the field. So once it's time for organizers and advocates and all the different people that we need to really be in this fight to jump in the game, that they have the tools and skills at their disposal and they're really in ways that are accessible, easy, and exciting for them to use, right? So, for example, with the Opportunity Agenda's immigration work, we have a monthly webinar series called the Narrative Research Lab that looks at immigration research, narrative research, and public opinion research from the immigrant justice movement to really brief advocates and organizers monthly on what's the cutting edge best practices from narrative change work. Similarly, what we're doing with the Immigrant Narrative Strategy table, we're focusing a lot on tool development, trainings, etc. Things that will be very cost effective, but also be very adaptable and usable for folks, that will look like the language they're using to talk to people in their communities, that they're using to talk to people in their lives. But I think in general, just creating more spaces for you know, that kind of narrative capacity building to take the, if it's so hard to be a communicator already and know the right thing to say all the time, nonetheless to know how narrative change works or what the best practices are in this field. So really just making it so everyone who wants to be part of this fight has the skills at their disposal to become an agent of narrative change, right? And it's easy for them to jump into that process. And then my third kind of, you know, disjointed point is that we really need to, or when we're looking at sustainability, and Alan talked a lot about this, talking about we need to be thinking about systems change. The narrative is about systems change, right? If we're talking about sustainability, we need to have a much more honest and open reckoning with both white supremacy and the rampantness of economic inequality. When we did original immigration research at the Opportunity Agenda last year, one of the main findings we found were in large-scale surveys, the two greatest ways to predict anti-immigrant sentiment were, first off, people's levels of anti-blackness. So we asked them a sort of standard research battery of questions to gauge if they fall into a high level of anti-blackness category or a low level. And then secondly, another of the strongest predictors was how people feel about the economy. So not literally how the economy works for them or how they're doing, how they feel they're treated by the economy, right? So those two things, levels of anti-blackness and also people's feeling of how they're treated by the economy. And those are things that are true across all movements, not just immigration, right? And so I think we need to begin figuring out, and not begin because this is work that people have been doing for years and years and years, but continue working towards a more explicit reckoning with the intentional class divisions that are produced to really prevent people from building narrative power, and the intentional racial divisions that are really utilized to stoke anti-immigrant sentiment and prevent us from building power together. So that was a bit long-winded of an answer, but I hope that helps, Cheryl.
Thank you. It does, and I'd like to share a little bit about how Charlie and I met. Right before we sent out our save the dates, or about to send out our save the dates for this event, a member of my team sent me an email, and the Opportunity Agenda was doing a very similar event, or at least it looked that way. And I reached out to Charlie and said, I did not want what we're doing here to be a one-off, because as Norma mentioned, this is not necessarily the space where the ACLU spends its time, and yet it is what the Opportunity Agenda does. But then we had Alan, so it's like, we're going to do our event. So I reached out to Charlie, and the response was so enthusiastic. I reached out to him and said, this work that we're doing needs to land somewhere. And we need to provide, because for those of you who don't know me yet, you can see how I work. I like to bring it all to one space so people can see what the opportunities there are to engage. And to be able to figure out this combination that we could create, where we could hand this effort off to a group that was already doing some of the work that we think needs to be done, was great. And he's online because he has COVID. He's doing it anyway. So I think that's just kind of awesome. But the question that I have, now I haven't thrown you these couple of bouquets, the question that I have for you, Charlie, is how close are we to people who think like that? Because we can't do this work unless we are willing to say we can work together. How close are we? And you can speak with regards to the immigration justice work that you're doing, but I think we all need to think about this in the other spaces where we care about change. But in the work that you're doing, how close? On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like we're totally in alignment and what's holding us up?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Again, there's so many ways I can answer that question. I think, it goes both ways. In one end, I think there's so many people who are doing extremely impactful narrative change work and do not think of themselves as narrative strategists. I think the most powerful narrative strategists don't think of themselves as such. And so on one side, I think a lot of it is on us of folks who really are narrative strategists or really working explicitly in the narrative change space to recognize the arenas where people are changing hearts and minds already. There are cultural activists, cultural strategists, people who work in food, all of these other things that are deeply tapped into what we need to change people's minds and change stories, right? So I think that's one piece of it. On another, on the other side of the same coin, I think the one thing that I have just been struggling with since getting into this work, and I will say since the 6 or 7 years I've been working in immigrant justice, starting from a narrative change perspective, I think the awareness of narrative has gone significantly up over the last couple of years. I think it's something that people are talking about a lot more. At the same time, I think, through the trauma of the Trump years and, the scarcity mindset that we're all working in, there's a lot of trepidation to dream big, get on the team together, align our movements together. There's a lot of, throwing people under the bus. What's the resources one group might get might not be applicable for others, right? And so I think when I'm thinking about narrative change, a lot of it is not necessarily how close are we, but what are the opportunities to expand public imagination, right? And how are we getting close to having more of those opportunities? And how are we not just waiting for crises to come about for those moments to exist? Because I think that's one thing that I've seen in the immigration space that really worries me, is that there is a reflexive nature, whether it's in fundraising, organizing, etc., and especially at the national level, not as much at the local level, to really become engaged in points of extreme crisis. And there's extreme crisis and suffering for so many people all the time that needs to be addressed, right? And so I think that's, I'm giving a couple of different answers. I think the main thing I would say is this focus on where's the opportunity to expand public imagination. I think that's where narrative flourishes and where narrative change flourishes, and really tasking organizations to jump into the deep end of that, because most of the narratives that we have aren't serving us and aren't moving our communities towards any type of change. that they realistically need.
Felicia, having heard all of this,
Yeah.
how do you envision art advocacy as a practice, expanding, evolving to play a more strategic role in driving narrative change?
You know, Cheryl, when you asked me to join this panel, I wasn't sure if I fit, and then I thought about a very recent experience I was having working in a community in southeastern San Diego. This is the new Black Arts and Culture District. And it's a 9-block area, you already know what I'm talking about, around on Imperial. And so we're arts advocacy and we work here. Here we're trying to change, you know, we're trying to get bills passed and, you know, we're trying to get big legislation that will impact everybody. That's what we think we gotta win. And then I think, and Dee, you understand this too, so we get the bill passed and we got maybe more money for the arts, and guess where that money goes? Opera, the ballet, goes to these big museums. It never trickles down to this particular community that deserves to have more access to arts and culture, and maybe art and culture as a tool could do incredible things for this community. But they're not getting any of that because they're not in the pipeline. They don't have people on the boards that can access this money. And we just did more harm than good for the community that we care about, you know. So one of the things that we have to do in arts advocacy is look through everything we do with a racial equity lens to say whatever we're working on, whatever we're fighting for, if it's not helping people in our most marginalized communities, reconsider whether that's the goal. Is it really the goal to get a higher percentage of our transient occupancy taxes to go into the bucket if the people who need it most aren't going to benefit from it? So the project we're working on, and this is perfect, Alan, I'm so glad I was here, is about narrative change, because Southeastern San Diego community, what they need is to tell a different story about who they are, about the fact that they're deserving of these funds, the fact that the stories that have been historically and systemically told about them are lies, that there is no 4 corners of murder or whatever they call it, 4
corners of death.
4 corners of death. There is no 4 corners of death in Southeast San Diego. Did it have a gang problem at some time? Maybe all of San Diego did. But if you look at the statistics today, the highest murder rate or crime rates are downtown, they're in Balboa Park, all those areas, but you go into Encanto and all these other areas, they're peaceful. There are people living in middle-class homes who aren't enjoying the same increase in their property values like everybody else, because it has been stigmatized as a horrible place to live, and there are horrible people who live there because they're black and brown people. And so at the last meeting of this committee that's overseeing the development of this cultural district, someone raised their hands and said, how can we get people to think differently about our community so we stop being left out? And so narrative change is what's needed there. It's about the perception of this community. It's not a branding issue. All the things that we do from this point forward through this racial equity lens will be talking about how we get the stories to shift away from who they are, not what's happening. And then we use art and culture as the tool to send that message home. That mural on the side of the Park and Rec building about the heroes and sheroes of that community, the people who went to the Olympics and all that, it's going to beautify the side of the building. It's going to be great. But what's it really, really doing? It's helping them tell their own story in a very authentic way.
Right.
So I'm excited about the idea that, yeah, we're going to continue to go after and tell our activist stories and go after the people who are already in the choir and all that, but really we need to move on to the 2s and the 3s and the 4s, right? Changing the narrative and perceptions in communities before we even start trying to do the bigger legislative work about passing bills and things like that, that never seem to make a difference in these communities of need.
I appreciate that, and being from southeastern San Diego, I very much so, and there's others in the room who I grew up with who know the same. Kristen, tell us how we can strategically use social media when working with influencers. That's the way that we scale up, right?
Absolutely, 100%. So I think, as I spoke to before, influencers' ability to connect authentically to various audiences can be very powerful in countering negative narratives. So for example, I was doing a little research when I was preparing for this panel, and I was looking at, for instance, mental health awareness and stigma reduction. So it's only a mere, I say the 1920s, maybe 100 years ago, where women were still being thrown in institutions for hysteria. And now here we are 100 years later, and we have influencers who are talking about mental health openly and honestly, and talking about reducing stigma associated with suicide. And so much of that is changing the narrative by storytelling, talking about their lived experience, talking about their friends, their family, who has been affected by this, and educating, whether that means educating an audience that committing suicide is not the proper terminology or what we try to say anymore, because that implies committing a sin, which this is about mental health. This is not about right and wrong. This is not about the church. This is about someone who died by suicide. And so I think we're really fortunate in that we live in a time where you have Selena Gomez, who's like getting a semicolon tattoo that represents like suicide prevention, and it's a pause and not a stop. And you have Simone Biles, who withdrew from the Olympics, arguably like the largest public platform, and said, I need to prioritize my mental health first. And so I think that's really incredible that we live in that time. I think when it comes to actual applicability to social media, I'd say a couple of the things that you need to do on this, I'm sorry to like beat a dead horse, but it comes to authenticity. Be authentic. Don't try to talk about something that you don't know or that you can't really, doesn't resonate with you. And then storytelling, really using storytelling. I think that is the common theme across everything that we're talking about. Storytelling brings us together. It's something where you understand and it humanizes what you're talking about. There's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end in all storytelling. And so the more we understand that, the better. And then I think the biggest thing that we forget to do with influencers is a call to action. So a lot of the time, it might be that you're just wanting them to educate. And so let's say with suicide prevention, you're educating, please don't use that terminology, it's harmful. But if you're also educating them or asking them to take action, ask them. Ask them to sign this petition. Ask them to vote this way. Ask them to do what you're wanting them to do. Don't assume that they know because you've spoken about this issue at hand that they're going to automatically think, okay, now I connect the dots and I know what you want me to do. They don't. When it comes to engaging with people in general, like I was watching this communications webinar and they were talking about how you want to really talk to people like they're in third grade. Like very clear call to actions. I want you to do this. I need you to do this. And that's what you have to do. So I think when you do those appeals, if you're asking your influencers, hey, help us on this cause, always ask, tell them what you need from them. Say, do you want me to do a PSA? Do you want me to do a video? Do you want me to do an appearance? Do you want me to organize a hashtag that's going to go viral? For as much as you can do that. And what have you. And then also just thinking about your audiences. So are you really appealing to the younger demographic and you're going to Facebook for that? probably not going to be that helpful. Or are you like looking for the younger generation that's going to be more TikTok, Instagram? Like, just think about what vehicle you're using and who you're talking to. But a lot of the time we are talking to the older generation, and so yes, like Facebook is the place to go for that. That's where your grandparents are posting pictures and doing things, and our parents.
Like that progressive commercial. Yeah, that's what the old people are doing.
So just keeping in mind who you're talking to, where you're talking, and what you're asking. Always make a clear call to action. I can't stress that enough.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone. I just want to make sure there are no last remarks, because unfortunately we're going to have to close this panel out.